Hello, everybody. We're just going to give you a couple more minutes to log on to the webinar. People are still joining us, but we will be starting in about 2 more minutes. Hello, my name is Joanne Dimitrakopoulos. I head up the commercial marketing at Resolve Biosciences, where we are launching a molecular cartography platform into the spatial biology market. Full disclosure, I am a board member with SAMPS. I'm joined by Joan Boyce, who is working behind the scenes. She is a fellow board member who will be fielding the questions to our guest speaker, Lisa. We would ask that you either raise your hand to speak or enter the questions into the chat and Q&A functions. Joan is also a board member with SAMPS and also general manager of BioCompare. All board members of SAMPS are volunteers, which is a not-for-profit organization focused on improving the skill sets of sales and marketing professionals in the life sciences. Please feel free to reach out to us if you would like to volunteer for the organization and if you would like to sponsor any of our future webinars. Today we will be joined by Dr. Lisa Beeler, who is a practitioner-turned-academic, passionate about artificial intelligence and how it is changing the customer experience. She is an assistant professor responsible for researching the newest marketing technologies and preparing the next generation to be competent, creative employees in the marketing field. Much of her current research is working with companies to figure out how customers and employers are navigating this fourth industrial revolution through exploring topics such as AI capabilities, AI bias, and the infamous Uncanny Valley. When she isn't researching or teaching, you'll find her playing soccer, throwing themed parties, and watching every documentary on Netflix. Thank you, Lisa, so much for agreeing to update and introduce us to this topic of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm excited to be here. So I'll get started.
Yes, please.
Okay, perfect. So as noted, I'm an assistant professor at Ohio University, and I do focus on artificial intelligence. And in my research area specifically is how do companies adopt AI technologies, and then also how do they get their employees to actually use them? We'll talk a little bit about the differences between traditional technology projects and how we should be viewing AI technologies in the firm. So the focus today is specifically lovely noted and titled Making Your Data Sing to You. So I know that there's been some conversations in the past in the workshops about CRM systems and data collection and those sorts of things. Today, we're going to talk about how do you use AI to take all the data that you have and make it sing to you. So let me first kind of set expectations here. What I am not is a data scientist. I know enough about data science because when you get a PhD, you have to learn quite a bit about algorithms and also statistics and different things. But I have brilliant people on my team that write code and really create the algorithms that we'll be talking about today. What I am is actually an AI anthropologist of sorts. And that's just a general term that someone mentioned to me, and I think it stuck really well with what I do. So a lot of the projects that I work on are really, as I mentioned, talking about first, what is AI generally? How can we make sure that we're choosing the right AI? How do we incorporate it in our firm? What are the considerations, et cetera? So the questions that we will be answering today is, what is AI? Why use AI? I'm going to give you some examples of ways that AI is used in both general life sciences and also in marketing and sales. My PhD specifically in marketing, so that's an area I'm particularly familiar with. Talk a little bit about the barriers that we see companies consistently come up against as they start thinking about AI. What about these buzzwords that I keep hearing, right? Like we hear a lot of buzzwords around AI, and two that I think are particularly important are AI bias and then also the black box. And then I'm hoping after all that you say, okay, I get it. I think I want to do this. So let's talk about how do we actually start. So we're going to do this in 30 minutes. So it's going to be a little bit like drinking from a fire hydrant. But know that you're always welcome to reach out to me if you want to further any sort of conversations about how you specifically in your company may go about this. So first, can you launch the polls, Joanne, just so I can get kind of a vibe for the people that are on here, exactly what their knowledge is in regards to AI. So first, just tell me a little bit about how knowledgeable you are. I'm not even really sure what it is. I have enough knowledge to be dangerous. I know quite a bit, or I'm a wizard. I know a ton. So I'll give you a couple seconds there to answer that. Okay, we could close that out. And what results did we have there? Oh, perfect. So I have enough knowledge to be dangerous. That's where a lot of us are. So don't feel bad. I would say most people, it's either they're not even sure what it is or have enough knowledge to be dangerous. For those couple folks that know quite a bit and are AI wizard, you're going to help me co-teach. So what I mean by that is there's going to be an interactive session at the end of the presentation where you can share what are success stories you have in regards to AI, what are barriers that you saw. So I would love for the couple folks that said they feel very knowledgeable about this topic at the end of this presentation to join in on that discussion in a significant way. Since I do not work specifically in the life sciences, you're going to teach me a lot about how you're using it if you are particularly in the life sciences. So for those folks that said, I don't even really know what it is, we're going to start at a baseline, so don't worry. So you're still in the right place. Artificial intelligence, when you really boil it down to at its simplest form, it's really just the simulation of human intelligence by machines. So in other words, it can learn, it can reason, right? So it's different from traditional tech. Let's say a CRM system, a customer relationship management system. Let's say you use Salesforce, the traditional version. If you do that, you put data in and then you can go look at data, but you yourself have to do the reasoning and the learning, et cetera. Well, AI has introduced technology that actually takes a portion of that, and we'll talk about the different levels, but a portion of that and says, no, I got you. I'm actually gonna learn and give you some insight and suggestions. So it's really that simple. It's just the idea of machines doing what humans have traditionally done. When we think about artificial intelligence and we segment it into kind of different levels, where we're really at right now is mostly this narrow artificial intelligence. So what that means is that there are AI technologies that really specialize in something. So for example, fun examples, of course, we've seen that Watson can now beat other humans at chess almost pretty consistently, right? Or salespeople may be using AI to send automated emails as opposed to having to manually go in and write an email for every single lead that they want to follow up with that day, right? So most of the things that we come into contact with as consumers and marketers is really this narrow artificial intelligence. The way we need to think about it is AI is kind of like a toddler right now. It's not a technology that you're going to be able to just grab, turn it on, and use it. Instead, AI, even in the narrowest form the way we're using it right now, you have to bring it into your firm and you have to consistently be feeding and nurturing and watering. And we'll talk about how you do those things in just a minute. But of course, a lot of that is good data. Now, artificial general intelligence suggests that a computer can actually be as smart as a human across the board. So the narrow says AI is actually probably better than humans on specific tasks in specific contexts. But when you move to general artificial intelligence, now we're at kind of a level where, let's say you could replace a salesperson with some sort of AI, or you could replace a doctor with some sort of AI. We are nowhere near there. Anybody who kind of pushes that idea, you will hear most of the experts that have way more knowledge than I do and way smarter than me say we're just not there. And so then when you think about super intelligence, where it's much smarter than humans, we're nowhere close to that. So first, I want to quieten some of your fears. The fear that AI is going to take over everything soon, it's just not going to happen. Now, some people suggest that in about 50 years, we may see some of this general AI. We may not, we don't really know, but I actually just read something and plopped it in here right before I hopped on this call. Karen Howe is a leader at MIT, and she just posted this sadly accurate but hilarious kind of index of or glossary of terms that we talk about in regards to AI. And she posted the definition of artificial general intelligence, and it says a hypothetical AI god that's probably far off in the future, but also maybe imminent, can be really bad or really good, whichever is more rhetorically useful. So she's kind of tongue in cheek here in the sense of this general AI being able to take over a whole role or a human. It's pretty far off in the future. I'm excited to see it because I don't think it's going to take jobs. Instead, it's going to kind of augment our jobs and allow us to really focus on value. But point being, most of our AI is really in this initial narrow scope, narrow scope use. So let me just run through just some really quick examples of AI tools in life sciences. So one is diagnosis and identification. So for example, Watson can be used to actually look through imaging and make better diagnoses, right? Also, things like personalized medicine. So here's some examples of AI systems that can provide personalized medicine. So for example, you see the Skin Vision one down there in the bottom. You can actually use your phone to take pictures of spots that maybe you're concerned, as opposed to running to the doctor right that moment. Now, we're not saying that these things should replace doctors. Of course, that's not true. Like I said, we're in that narrow AI. But a doctor, to be able to kind of use this information within their own current knowledge and be able to apply it to the patient, is obviously where we're at and where this can be really valuable in the life sciences. Also, drug discovery. So for example, Microsoft's Project Hanover and Inference both really speak to kind of areas of drug discovery where treatment decisions can be made based on a huge database, as opposed to a doctor having to think back at certain patients they had in similar situations, right? There's actually an algorithm that can say, okay, so based on all these factors, here's the treatment I would recommend. And then the doctor takes that knowledge and goes, okay, so based on what I know, and sometimes it's meet in the middle, right? It doesn't mean you're at the mercy of AI. It's a human in the loop. So that's just some ways that I wanted to share really quickly, just so we can set our mind frame as we talk through some of the considerations that it's used in the life sciences. So if you're in life sciences, I would love for you in the chat, while I keep moving forward, to type in so that everyone can see, is there a tool, AI tool, that you're using, and kind of generally what's its purpose? Because I want to crowdsource ideas. If none of you are using this, no problem. But if you are, I would love for you to type that in the chat right now. Now, I will progress forward as we do that, and we'll probably revisit this in the discussion portion. So now let's talk about examples of AI tools in marketing and sales, because I know a lot of folks on this call may be in marketing or sales roles. Well, automation is the big area where we can see value in marketing and sales. So for example, if you use Salesforce, you may have seen Einstein within Salesforce. And Einstein tells salespeople, for example, or the marketing team, okay, based on the idea that this customer visited the website, I see that they contacted this salesperson or had a meeting a few days ago. It takes all this information that you have in your CRM program and says, okay, here's what you should do now. Okay. So automation in the sense of these insights that a lot of times we've had to sit down and really dig through our data and think about, and also automation in the sense of, let's say that you have 5,000 leads that you have to contact in a day, you can set up AI to personalize and send those emails. Seventh Sense, for example, is a perfect way to kind of use data in your CRM system to really think about timing of emails and cadence and all these different things, right? Now, since a lot of sales and marketing things have gone virtual, we've seen a huge rise in AI in the sense of voice coaching. So what I mean is, let's say that you have a call with a potential client, or you have a call with maybe your current customer. There's AI that will actually listen in on your call and then afterwards provide recommendations on things you should have said, things you shouldn't have said, the tone of the voice, what was the general vibe, right? And you can take that and then coach either yourself or coach others if you're a manager on, okay, what do we do moving forward? There's even some that does live action in the sense of while you're in the process of selling or talking, actually it says, hey, right now, if you say this or do this, right? So there's a lot of different options of tools in the area of virtual and online meetings. One of my favorite here that I use my lovely husband as my test subject for is called Crystal. So what Crystal does, it's an AI tool that's a plugin. I think it's like $30 a month. And it's great for, let's say, B2B relationships where prospects and potential customers are super high value, right? Some customers in B2B are worth millions and millions of dollars. So what Crystal does, it actually analyzes people's LinkedIn page. So yeah, there's a little crux there in the sense of the prospect needs to actually be on LinkedIn and using LinkedIn, but a lot of us are. So what it does is it actually looks at Brad's page in this instance and goes, okay, so based on the things Brad posts, based on what Brad does, based on pictures on Brad's page, how do you approach Brad in a meeting? And the reason why I did my husband's, of course, I know him very well, and it was dead on. So Brad is a very analytical minded. He's an engineer. I won't make any jokes about stereotypes, but he is an engineer. He's very analytically minded. It even gives you things such as, when speaking to Brad, what do you focus on? In a meeting with Brad, take time to explain ideas. Give time to process after the meeting. Brad's a slow decision maker. Schedule meetings at a precise time. It's all these different things. Whereas if you looked up mine says not waste time, but use a lot of time building rapport. She loves to tell stories, be expressive. So it provides a very different way you're going to approach a meeting with Brad versus myself. So anyone that's using any AI marketing tools in sales and marketing, either of that area, if you're using those, please put those in the chat, and then the general, just kind of quick purpose beside them. That way people have more examples, and also we can revisit it later because I would love to hear some success stories, and I would love to hear some failure stories. AI is like every other thing that we try in business, right? There's a range of successes and failures, and we learn from all of those. So the general idea, though, is that AI can be applied across the really the product journey, right? So when you think about, let's say, R&D or manufacturing or supply chain or commercial, there are many different applications and tools that speak specifically to the journey of a typical life science or any product, right? So a lot of you may be marketing and sales folks, so you're really focusing on that commercial use of AI. Some of you may be health professionals, so you're focusing on maybe R&D or supply chain. But point being, there is tons of tools that you can use dependent upon your role. Now, we know that life science is recognizing the value in AI because about 60% of life science companies spent over $20 million on AI initiatives in 2019. And it's going to keep increasing over the years as AI becomes more capable, as more tools are available for different uses. However, we know we fail miserably at actually implementing AI. So it's hype, right? We get excited. We think, oh, this is amazing. This tool is going to solve all my problems. And then we get it. And we're like, it's terrible. It's not doing anything right. My employees won't use it. I don't even like it, right? So we know that the failure rate is extremely high when it comes to implementing AI. And there's a few reasons that we know why. One reason is not really the variety of tools. So this is just an AI landscape at a very general AI basic level. And this doesn't even touch on specific fields such as the life sciences necessarily. So it's definitely not failure because we don't have access to tools. So why are we so bad at this? Why are we so bad at using AI? Well, a recent Deloitte industry report actually aligns perfectly with the conversations that I have with businesses. And mainly it says the top challenges impacting AI initiatives include difficulty in identifying business cases with high value, right? Data challenges and integrating AI into the organization. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. So what are the general barriers to making AI work for you, or as entitled, your data seen to you through AI? First is data. So if you really think about the type and amount of data you need in regards to using AI, it's really a high expectation. So first, a lot of us have no data, right? We may have a little bit of data about customer sales or something like that. But when you really look at that day-to-day behavioral data, like what kind of interactions are happening, we know that a lot of times my history's in sales and marketing, and I was a national marketing and sales director. I practically had to threaten my sales employees to actually put data in my CRM system. So we know that we either don't have it or the data we have is usually terrible, right? So we think about some of the data we have, it's outdated. It used to be this person, now it's this person. Their email changed, their usage changed, their products changed, right? So data is the first barrier. You have to have good data, you have to have high quality data, and you have to collect data. And that's not easy. We know it's not easy, or CRM systems wouldn't still struggle to be implemented. We'll talk a little bit more about data in just a moment. Another thing, 2 and 3 kind of go together. So cross-functional divides and no shared systems. So when you think about the historical marketing and sales divide, we all know about it, right? We know that you marketing people are trendy and creative and cool and customer focused, and you're thinking about brand loyalty and long-term initiatives. And us salespeople are sketchy and pushy and trying to make customers, buy something right now. We don't care about long-term. So we know that these divides, jokingly, maybe, but it's not that far off. We just have different focuses, different strategies. But if you could get people to actually work together, how much valuable data could marketing gather and sales gather and be able to look at this beautiful ecosystem of the customer journey? From the moment the customer, let's say, visited your website, when they liked something on LinkedIn that you posted, when they emailed you or you emailed them, all these interactions across the customer journey, these little baby data points are so critical to really make your data sing via AI. A lot of companies don't have shared systems. So this is kind of the same idea that's driving this idea of just scattered data is, let's say, so for example, my husband works for Toyota. So let's say Toyota, their manufacturing and engineering team has a certain system, and my husband's consistently interacting with people that provide parts for Toyota. But then marketing has a different system, right? They use, let's say, Insights. And then sales uses Salesforce. We have these systems that are disjointed, carrying all this rich data, in the case of people are actually putting it in there, that need to somehow be brought together to be able to really speak to what you're trying to do, but also allow AI to do its job well. The last thing, oh yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Lisa, we have a few questions and
Sure.
comments coming in here.
Great.
And I think one of them that came in is, what advice can you give companies about turning their existing data into good, clean data? Are there tools to do this?
Okay, perfect. So you're not going to like this answer. It is a lot of work. So I won't say there are not tools to do this. I will say that based on a couple that I've used, they don't do it well yet. So what that means is that may mean that you're hiring an individual to start looking at your data. Now, granted, I don't mean thousands or millions of data points, but start hiring an individual, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a data scientist, but I do think it needs to be someone who is has a high level understanding of the importance of data and what it says and what it doesn't say. So in other words, I think sitting down and saying, okay, what data do we have? What data do we actually think is valuable? Don't waste time on data that's not valuable. So for example, a funny little anecdote story is one company that I know that sells clothes have all this data, and the AI told them that they should now sell, it was a female women's company. They said, well, you should sell men's clothes. That was the AI's insight. Well, the reason why the AI was saying that, because they had tried doing it before, it didn't work. The reason the AI was saying that is because in their system were salutations of Mr. such and such. So point being, that's a useless piece of data that you don't really need. So I think my first suggestion would be setting down and deciding, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a later slide, setting down and deciding what are the actual key valuable pieces of information, where do we house those, and then start deciding, okay, what are the cleaning parameters? What is our expectations of quality? And starting initially doing it manually, so that you know you're on the right track, then you would be able to potentially find a tool that starts to clean your data based on kind of the boundaries that you set. So I don't want to name a tool because I don't want to suggest the one that I use that I would not say was very accurate or good. But I know there are tools out there, but that manual part in the beginning is critical, because if you feed that algorithm crappy data that doesn't set appropriate cleaning boundaries, it's just going to perpetuate that through all your data.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I mean, there is another question, and I don't know whether you're going to address it later on in your presentation, but it's around those of us not using AI yet. How do we go about learning and deciding on the best tools?
Perfect.
What are the criteria we should use?
Absolutely. We're going to address that on the very last slide. And that's what I would also love for folks that are using it to jump in and co-teach with me. So yes, we'll absolutely address that on the last slide. So I'll hold on that one.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. So thank you for those questions, and please don't stop putting them in the chat box. And if that means we address them at the end, we address them at the end, no problem at all. So the last barrier that I want you to think about is storytelling. So, you know, like I said, with the instance where it said, oh, you should sell men's clothes. And it's like, where'd you get that insight? Oh, we got it because there's a bunch of Mr. salutations where maybe someone ordered the women's clothes for their partner or something like that. So data storytelling is key. I think a lot of people, and this is where I would say my real value is in the sense of what I teach and what I do with companies is, okay, we have the data, we have the insights. Now, how do we convert these into real-time value? And how do we get, let's say, the executive team or my employees to buy in? A lot of times it says something like it shoots out something and we go, okay, it says that if we do this, if we focus on men, we'll do better. But why? And why are we selling this, right? So this idea of kind of data storytelling, I think you're going to see, I hope you can remember me when you start to see these folks pop up in companies, people that work between the data scientist and those people making the big strategic decisions as the liaison that translates, okay, what are we going to do with these numerical insights we have? I think we're going to see that role pop up quite a bit. So with those barriers, there are a couple other considerations that I also want you to think about before we start thinking about implementing AI. So we hear buzzwords, like I said, all the time. Do they matter? Some do, some don't. If you want to actually see where I pulled that definition of general artificial intelligence from Karen Howe, visit me on LinkedIn, add me there, whatever. It's public though, so you don't have to. You'll see I actually just shared it. There's a ton of buzzword glossary. What does it mean? So feel free to look at that as kind of a huge overview of what are the words we're using in this domain. But I think two particular ones that are important, especially in areas where AI could have high risk, like life science, right? In the sense of we're diagnosing people or we're telling people to do something to their body. Two things, AI bias and black box. So what is AI bias? Well, first, let me just make sure that everyone knows the fundamentals of how AI works. AI is an algorithm, but that's just a big scary word to say, if this, then that. So perfect example is if I had a second husband, it would be Netflix, because Netflix knows me almost as much as my husband. And how it's figured out me is it goes, okay, Lisa watches Dateline, 48 Hours, all these murder shows. She surely is going to like making a murderer, and it sends me that, right? So over time, the more I watch Netflix, the better it gets to know me, because all it is a set of rules. An algorithm is just a set of rules that says, if this, then that. So if Lisa likes Dateline, she's probably going to like making a murderer. That's all it is. Now, let's think about it in a different context. Let's say that I had to write an algorithm that I was trying to find the smartest people in Athens, Ohio, which is where I live. So to be able to do that, I'm sorry, I'll say the smartest college students in Athens, Ohio. So I'm trying to write that algorithm. So what I would do, I would think, okay, what do I think constitutes data points that would say these people are probably the smartest people? Well, GPA, maybe where they went to high school, maybe they're the majors, certain majors, I think people are smarter, maybe their ACT, but you probably are already starting to see a problem with this, because I am writing the algorithm myself based on my assumptions. So we know right now a lot of schools did away with the ACTs and SATs and are actually showing that it is not a good indicator of how smart people are. Instead, wealth is an indicator of how well students do on ACTs and SATs, probably because people get training and classes, right, if their parents can afford that. So with that being said, also think about majors. Well, I'm biased. I'm biased towards College of Business. I think the College of Business probably has a lot of the smartest students. This list, it doesn't have it on there. But what if you're an engineer? You may write that into the code that, well, if they're an engineer, they're more likely to be the smartest. If their GPA is above a 3.7, they're more likely to be the smartest. So you can already see how our own biases, as we write the initial algorithm, start to creep in and potentially skew what that group of folks looks like in the outcome. So for some of you that work in the life sciences, your group may have a lot of life science people in it because you wrote it into the algorithm that, well, of course, life science folks just tend to be smarter, right? So you start to see how bias can creep into the actual creation of algorithms. Now, there are machines that are writing their own algorithms, but a lot of algorithms are really started by coding, humans coding things, those sorts of things. So you can already see how this can become a problem. Another way bias can creep into AI is the training data. So you have an algorithm, but it doesn't really work until you train it. So that's why I said it's like a little toddler that you're constantly kind of nurturing and teaching, right? So here's a great example of actual health science application of how bias can creep into the training data. So let's say that you're testing this Alzheimer's algorithm so that you can say, okay, if I see a patient with all these signs, there's a higher likelihood that they may end up with Alzheimer's. Well, with that being said, you have to train the algorithm. So you grab a group of folks, right? You can't grab a group of, billions of folks. So you grab, let's say, a couple hundred, a few 100,000, what you have access to, and it trains the algorithm. Well, the problem is then that since you don't have the total US population, let's focus specifically on US, that has Alzheimer's, Well, the data is naturally going to be skewed more to look like that group that you chose to train the algorithm on. So if somebody doesn't fall into that group, they may be misdiagnosed. There may be an error in the sense of the treatment may be wrong, right? There's a lot of errors that can occur there. So bias can creep in by the actual algorithm itself, so written in there by a human, or the training data that's chosen to actually train the algorithm that you just created. And we saw this go real wrong for Microsoft. So Microsoft creates this chatbot that was supposed to be autonomous. Its name was Tay. And they released it on Twitter, and they were so excited about it. And I actually talked to someone that was part of a lead on this team. And he had a lot of he was like, I woke up with, thousands of emails in my inbox, and we just shut it down. But what happened was they created the algorithm for Tay. They released it. Tay started learning from other Twitter users. If you're a Twitter fan, I'm sorry, but Twitter tends to be full of trash. There's a lot of garbage on Twitter. So as Tay started pulling and learning from all these other Twitter users, Tay got really racist and sexist really fast, and they had to shut it down. So that's kind of a somewhat lighthearted, humorous example of how the training data can go real wrong real fast. But when you apply that to the life sciences, you can see how that can be detrimental and terrible when you're talking about people's health or diagnoses. And we see it already in healthcare. So all you have to do is Google racial bias or Google algorithmic bias and healthcare, and you're going to see a ton of examples. So for example, Black patients lose out on critical care because some AI systems that are being used say, well, Black people need less care. This is what the AI systems say, not the human. Black people need less care. Black people are tougher. Black people don't do this or don't do that. This is just an example of racial bias, but you can think about it in regards to gender bias or other potential biases that maybe healthcare AI is already susceptible to. The other buzzword that I do think is important is the black box. Now, what is the black box? All the black box is the idea that some AI systems are doing their thing and we have no idea what's happening. However, we're taking the recommendation and going, okay, cool, it says this is what I should do, so I'm going to do this. The problem with that is A, you can't replicate it, and B, you can't explain it. So when you think about it, this was a quote from a doctor that said, many machine learning tools are still black boxes that render verdicts without any justification. Once again, in a high risk field such as health sciences, you think about that you're taking recommendations from a system that you don't really understand or know what's happening. So my only kind of cautionary tale there is ensuring that instead of leaning on AI and taking it at face value, I would suggest doing the opposite, understanding what's in the algorithm, what it's doing, and making sure that you understand what those recommendations are being based on. Because if they're not being based on appropriate things, that could cause some serious issues. Yeah, Joanne?
Hey, Lisa, I'm going to try and unmute Fraser because Fraser has actually put in the AI that they've been using with their company. Is that okay, Fraser?
Yeah, I would love to hear it. Yes.
Okay, great. Here we go.
Oh. Am I on?
You are. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting to be part of the show, but nice to be here.
Why not? Why not?
Yeah, I think we can, it would be tempting to spend a lot of time splitting hairs between what is AI, what is machine learning, I think in our case, I like to refer to it more as robotic automation. Mm-hmm. The idea that we had a very manual task and now we're able to very efficiently do that through algorithms.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a note that I threw in when you were asking what kind of tools we use.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a black box. I think I know what's going on inside our black box. But we've actually, we do use our own robotic automation processes for cleaning up customer records.
Perfect.
Applying customer health scores, data quality scores. Okay. I think, Lisa, what you mentioned earlier is spot on, which is before you can really start to adopt any of these advanced data techniques, even data analytics, one of the important things is to have your house in order from a data quality perspective. Otherwise, I've seen lots of organizations rush in, build out data warehouses, build out analytics teams,
Yeah.
only to have the team work for a few months and come back and say, okay, we have a major insight. Your data is crap, right?
Yeah.
That's our biggest insight. We spent 80% of, you hear this a lot from analytics teams.
Yeah.
We spent 80% of our time cleaning up your data, trying to get everything in the same format.
Yeah.
And we're spending very little time actually deriving any insights from it.
Do you mind to share, Fraser, what tool you're using?
Well, so in full disclosure, we are actually a data analytics company. So the company is called Talend.
Okay.
And so we specialize in data integrity and data quality.
Okay.
One of our core tenets is this concept of a trust score.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't jump on to run an ad for my firm, but that's what we do. So we see this challenge a lot in life sciences. We work with a lot of the large life science companies, and particularly on the sales and marketing side.
Sure.
And maybe just to add one last thought to the conversation here before you kick me off.
No, you're good.
One thing to really look out for, which we see a lot, is this concept of survivor bias. And what we mean by that in sales and marketing, right? I'll give you just one quick example. Let's say we're running a webinar, as we're doing here. The sales team says, this is great, but we need to know the zip code, we need the phone number, we need to know this person's role in the organization. So when they sign up, please add all of these fields to the sign up form. So marketing begrudgingly builds those in. The challenge you're going to have now is you can do analysis on all of the people who signed up and you can follow up on those leads. But what you're missing is this idea that who didn't make it into the webinar.
Absolutely.
That's a kind of simple example of that, but we see it a lot in other areas where people do analysis on downstream data and miss the fact that they actually lost a lot of people along in the process.
And those are the most important people, right? In the sense of, why did you lose them? Like, that's who you want, those sorts of things. Yeah. I've heard it referred to as selection bias, like in the sense of, the data is selected based on it's full, it's there. But yes, really thinking about, okay, what data is not there? Why is it not there? And how would it impact this algorithm or the use of it? Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what bias came in that made you exempt those people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I love co-teaching. So please do not apologize for taking over the show. Please. So thank you so much.
It's great. It's great interaction. Thank you so much, Fraser. So I shall mute you. Well, you already have, so great. But also during that conversation, another question came in, and we also have a comment going back to the mess of data that most companies have from Owen. So just want to recognize that we have seen your comment, Owen. But there is a question from Don Alexander regarding the black box scenario, asking, can AI tell one how it arrived at a conclusion?
So there's a range. So there's a range. I would say that the push is definitely for the black box to be opened. So I think a lot of companies are really recognizing that what we did kind of early on, where it was just like, oh, here's the insights, follow them, is not appropriate anymore. So my kind of response to that would be, as you consider tools, put that on your list of priorities. That you actually want a tool that you're able to, whether it's you or whether it's one of the data scientists on your team, explore that algorithm and see what's happening. And companies should be able to speak to you about that. Now, maybe not the salesperson, just to be very frank. Sometimes, when it gets all the way to the frontline person that you may be interacting with to buy the tool from, they might not be able to tell you that, but somebody that wrote that algorithm or is in that company will be able to tell you that. So I would always want something that you can at least have a general idea of how it's working, so that as the human, you can consistently be checking on that. Because something that is critically important, and I'll go ahead and go to that page, is the human in the loop. Because AI is only smarter than us in certain situations, certain contexts, you're almost always going to have a human, not always, but as far as probably I'm going to be alive, the human in the loop is definitely key and critical. And what that means is algorithms should consistently be toddler nurtured and checked. And also sometimes just because the system says this is what you should do, have a conversation with your sales team about it. I was actually talking to someone at Salesforce that said, okay, one of the things we did when we first started Einstein, which is a chatbot that gives recommendations to a salesperson within the CRM system, he said, we sat down and thought about, okay, it spat out a recommendation. Now let's talk about what you would actually do with this. And they would kind of debate, like, you know, whether as a salesperson, whether you would have acted on that, whether you would have acted on it, but adapted it, all those sorts of things. So this idea of the human in the loop and not just taking it for face value, I believe is critical. So point being, the idea of the black box kind of goes hand in hand with the human in the loop, because if you got a black box, you can't keep a human in the loop because the human has no idea what the heck's happening. We just get the insights. So there is a range of AI from completely black box to completely transparent. Just make that a priority as you consider purchasing a tool, and ask for that. Just let the salesperson or your team, your customer success manager at the company say, hey, this is something that's a priority to me. So I want to make sure how I can access this information. So that would be my suggestion. But there is quite a range.
Yeah, great. And another question came in around AI and how do you know that you've missed something? Is it via demographics?
So when you say miss something, do you mean miss something in regards to data? Or do you mean miss something in regards to an insight that you didn't get?
Well, the question was open around that, but oh, they've just typed in insight.
Okay, insights. So this goes back to human in the loop. So I really think the importance of consistently having meetings and thinking about what are the insights we're getting and having other brains in the room that know the context, right? What are the insights we're getting? What do we think is actually valuable and usable? What are the insights that we might be missing? And how then might we collect data that would be a proxy for that potential insight? So for example, maybe you figure out that maybe your AI system, because there's this thing called the echo chamber where it tends to just perpetuate what your data already says, kind of like training bias, right? Let's say that because you mainly have sold in the Northeast in the last decade, all of your data in your CRM system is mostly folks from the Northeast. Well, it's highly likely that your data might start saying, well, you should get more people from the Northeast because your data says that that's where you get your people. Obviously, though, as marketers, we know, but we're missing this huge other chunk of potential opportunity. So what I mean is that's a very basic general example that I think everybody can kind of understand and agree with. You can see the problem in that. So once again, it's setting down, and maybe it's an implementation issue of when you choose your tool, making, let's say, monthly meetings where you and a few others on your team or a few other folks that have different perspectives that would understand these insights sit down and go, okay, what are we missing? Because I wouldn't say that AI is at the point yet where it can tell you what it's missing. I think we'll be there one day, but we're nowhere near there.
Yeah, great. And another question came in, and I don't know whether it's something you can answer, but they're asking the typical cost to implement an AI-driven marketing platform.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a typical academic answer, and that's it depends, right? So you could pick up some easy automation tools today for $20 a month. And what I mean is, let's say you want to use that Crystal app to start to think about your leads. That's $30 a month. Let's say you want to use Otter to do transcriptions that you need. Yeah. I think I pay $8 a month for that, something like that. Or if you want to invest in something significant, you could be spending millions. I mean, as you saw in that statistic, a lot of life science companies are already spending $20+ million on AI technologies. So it depends in that sense on what you're trying to do. And I think actually it would be a great kind of segue into this is thinking about the best value for your money or best use cases, right? So the first question I would be asking myself if I was going to think about buying an AI tool is, where could AI add value? So don't start with a tool. We do this thing where we're like, oh my God, that's so cool. Let's get that. My team will use that. But then they don't use it. And it's probably because you got hyped up by the novelty or kind of the coolness, and you didn't really think about what is the business problem I'm trying to solve. And we do this all the time, right? With technology. This is not a new thing we do. We get excited about a technology and we try to shove a round peg in a square hole. Instead, start thinking about what are things that could be automated, but would add a lot of value, whether it be in my team, on my marketing team, whether it be in my company, depending on what level you're at. So once again, don't start with the tool. Start with the, where could I see value and what is my business problem? Maybe it's a customer-facing business problem. Maybe it's a team management business problem. Maybe it's a very high-level problem. But start with what you're trying to solve and find the tool for it. Now, am I going to say there's always going to be a tool for that specific thing? No, but highly likely that you'll at least have a few tools that do what you're looking for if you're speaking about, let's say, automation. Now, if you're looking for someone to replace your coworker, that's not going to happen. So start thinking small. Start thinking about these automated tasks, such as data cleaning, that you might be able to use to actually add a lot of value. Also, I think it's so important to break your expectations of AI. So we have these weird kind of competing, let me check my time. Okay. Competing expectations of AI. What I mean by that is we're scared to death. It's so good, it's going to take over our job, but we also want to just buy it, turn it on and leave it. So do you see how those kind of are two different expectations? It's not either of those things. First, it's not so amazing that it's going to be able to take over our job. Hollywood's kind of messed with us in that area, Will Smith. But also, it's not a project. You don't get to buy AI, turn it on, and it works perfectly. Like I said, you have data things you have to think about. You have getting your employees to adopt it or use it. You have to consistently, instead of a project, AI should be thought of as kind of a coworker or an evolving, as opposed to just like turn it on like a CRM and let's just use this technology. Sorry, go ahead, Joey.
So no, I was just going to interject there and agree with you that you really do need somebody to come in and sort of QC things as well. That you need that human. I think the transcription services are a prime example of that. I don't know how. I haven't used Otter, but I've used Sonic AI for transcriptions, and that's actually what we use at SAMPS. And there is a lot of editing that needs to go into that afterwards. You can't just kind of, have it run on the website and,
It's not easy. AI, and I think that's why a lot of companies fail, right? First, they get super hyped about, oh, we're going to get this cool tool and it's just going to work. And then secondly, they think like, okay, we turn it on and we never check on it again. So keep that mental picture. And for you folks that are parents, keep that mental picture of that toddler I showed you in your head. That's where we're at. So you're going to have to consistently be nurturing. When we go back to some other considerations, so, we're talking about, okay, I kind of buy into this, now what? And some of you have already brought some of this stuff up, so I won't belabor the point, but start thinking about data. So what do we have? Is it really good? Who owns it? Now, maybe marketing has some data that you don't even know about. Maybe sales has some data, maybe production. So even if you could kind of appoint someone to go around and collect in the sense of just what data you have, so that you can sit down and start thinking about, okay, so we have this data from marketing, this data from sales, this data from our website, this data from production. Now, what do we care about? What are we trying? What do we think is really representative to give us good insights? Also, because of that evolving nature of it, who's responsible for collecting the data? How do we collect it? Who owns it? All these accountability and responsibility issues are critical. And when you think about integrating AI into the organization, this kind of flows into that conversation. Setting expectations in internal education. If it's something that you're wanting people to adopt, whether it be customers or whether it be your employees, education is key. Generally, the group of us that are super hyped about new technology is smaller than the group who says, look, what I got's working, I'm good. So you're going to have to figure out, how do I set expectations for my employees or customers? And how do I make sure that I'm internally supporting them and educating them in a way to make sure that all the money we just spent on this product isn't wasted? Also, make sure that you use, let's say you want to use a product that involves your marketing team, include feedback from the beginning. If they're going to be using it, involve them in the decision-making process, involve them in how you're going to think about implementing it, involve them in the whole life cycle of this. First, it gives them some onus, and we know that the more someone feels like they were a part of something or own something, the more likely they are to actually, use it well. But also, it's just important to be able to implement right. And then the last thing, make sure that you're tracking the value of this. Tons of AI tools are adopted, and you look at the actual ROI and it's zero. Now, some tools are adopted and you don't see an actual monetary return, but you see that customers' health score is increased or something like that, right? So understanding what are we tracking, why those things matter, accountability of set goals and say, okay, it's not doing what it's supposed to do, so we need to consider something else. Don't worry about those sunk costs. You don't want to sink more. And also transparency. So allowing someone to hold you accountable for kind of what you said you were going to do, and is the tool really doing that? So that is the end of my show. Thank you so much for allowing me to pop on here and talk a little bit. We have a few minutes, so I can either take questions, or I would love to hear some success stories or failure stories, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, and just to let you know, I have unmuted everybody, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask Lisa some questions.
Or share. Like I said, I do not work in the life science area. So if you have some great success stories, whether it be on your marketing team or products that your company sells, please let us know.
Yeah, there is one where we're asking, is there a good review of the available tools?
So if you, let's say that you want to do marketing and sales tools, if you will literally type in Google marketing and sales AI tools, there's almost always a full landscape that is uploaded every year by different companies, sometimes Gartner, sometimes different companies, but that will give you that. I think I showed you one, earlier, that just was a general AI landscape, but it will give you a ton right there. If you want a specific tool, you can shoot me an email. My email is my last name, which is, I'll just put it in the chat. That's probably easiest. But you can shoot me an email. I can't tell you I'll give you the answer right that moment, but I'll do a little digging for you and maybe give you some options. But definitely just start with, if your area is marketing AI landscape, and look at the, it's usually top few lines of the Google image portion. If it's health sciences, I don't know that there's one specifically for health sciences. I actually look for that myself, but there is a general one for different phases of kind of the customer journey based on different roles. So just let me know if you have a problem finding that.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure.
Does anybody else have a question for Lisa? I know we have 1 minute left. But I want to thank you so much, Lisa, for your presentation today. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, but then I am a bit of an AI geek anyway. So, and that's how we ended up meeting, wasn't it? But we have recorded the webinar, and it will be available on the SAMP's website in the next couple of days.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much. If you ever think I can assist with choice or implementation at any point, just reach out to me. And it was a pleasure, and best of luck, and enjoy your Wednesday.
Yes, great. Thank you. Just to let everybody know, next month, May, we are May 4th, we are having another webinar. It's our webinar Wednesday, and that will be with Bonnie Skepowski, who is also a board member, and she will be helping us run virtual events. That again is at the usual time of 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern, and it is how to leverage interactivity to maximize audience attendance and engagement. And you can find the registration link on our website. So I would like to thank everybody for joining us, and take care and stay safe. Bye.